A millionaire comes across a woman who looks exactly like his late wife. As he approaches, he notices something on her ear. The wind bit at Joshua Grant's cheeks as he walked briskly down Fifth Avenue, his tailored coat doing little to keep out the autumn chill. Leaves swirled around his polished shoes, some clinging briefly before the wind tore them away. The streets buzzed with life, yellow cabs honking, street vendors shouting about their roasted chestnuts, and tourists huddled in clumps, snapping photos of the city's skyline. But Joshua moved through it all as though he were a ghost, untethered from the vibrant world around him. He glanced up at the grey sky, his breath puffing out in sharp clouds. For 3 years, his life had been a carefully crafted routine. Meetings, mergers, late nights at the office, anything to keep his mind occupied, anything to avoid the quiet moments that reminded him Laura was gone. He turned a corner, his steps slowing as he reached a quieter street. Outside a coffee shop, a small cluster of people gathered around a busker, playing a mournful tune on his violin. Joshua's eyes swept past them and froze. A woman hunched on a tattered blanket near the shop's entrance, her arms protectively wrapped around 2 small children. Although her clothes were mismatched and her hair was unevenly trimmed, it wasn't her appearance that stopped him. It was her face, the high cheekbones, the delicate curve of her jawline, and those eyes, haunted, sharp, yet achingly familiar. For a moment, the world around him blurred, and his chest tightened as though he'd been punched. It was impossible. Laura was gone. He'd seen her lowered into the earth. The woman looked up, her gaze meeting his. She stiffened, clutching the children closer, her body coiling like a spring. Joshua's breath hitched. It wasn't just her resemblance to Laura. There was something different, something he couldn't place. Then he saw it, a discreet hearing aid tucked behind her ear, its dull silver glint catching the fading light. "Mommy," the little girl murmured, her voice barely audible over the street noise. "Stay close," the woman said, her voice low, her tone edged with steel. She pulled the children closer, the blanket enveloping them like a fortress. Joshua stepped forward, cautiously, hands buried in his pockets. "Excuse me," she raised her hand sharply, cutting him off. "I don't need anything." Her words were clipped and defensive, but her eyes darted over him quickly, sizing him up. She wasn't just wary, she was exhausted. He could see it in the lines around her mouth, the way her shoulders sagged despite her rigid posture. I just thought..." Joshua faltered, unsure how to explain himself. How could he tell this stranger she looked like a ghost from his past? "We're fine," she said firmly, though the hollowness in her voice betrayed her. One of the children, a boy with wide eyes, tugged on her sleeve. "Mummy, I'm hungry." The woman's face softened briefly as she stroked his hair. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little longer." Joshua swallowed hard. "Look," he said, his voice gentler now. "I don't mean to intrude, but I'd like to help. Maybe a meal for the kids. Something warm." Her jaw tightened, her grip on the children unyielding. "We're not a charity case." "I didn't say you were." He crouched slightly, his tone earnest. He hesitated, his throat tightening. "You remind me of someone I used to know. That's all." For the first time, something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe even curiosity. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of guarded defiance. "I'm not her," she said flatly. "No," Joshua agreed softly, straightening. "You're not." The girl, small and wiry, peeked up at him from under the blanket. Her green eyes, startlingly bright, locked onto his, and for a moment he felt the world tilt. "Please," he said, his voice almost pleading now. "At least let me get you something to eat. The kids shouldn't have to. He trailed off, not wanting to insult her pride. The woman studied him, her eyes narrowing. The tension between them stretched thin, taut as a violin string. Then she shook her head, pulling her children even closer. "Thank you, but no," she said quietly, her voice softer but still firm. Joshua nodded slowly, retreating a step. "All right. If you change your mind." He reached into his pocket and held out a sleek business card. "Please. Call me." She stared at the card, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she reached out, hesitated, and then took it. "Maria," she said suddenly, her voice clipped. "Joshua," he replied, a faint, surprised smile tugging at his lips. Maria didn't smile back. Instead, she slipped the card into her pocket and turned her attention back to the children, wrapping the blanket tighter around them. Joshua lingered for a moment longer, unsure of what to say or do. Then, with a heavy heart, he turned and walked away. Behind him, Maria watched until he disappeared into the crowd, her fingers brushing against the card in her pocket. The late afternoon sun painted Joshua's penthouse in warm, golden hues, casting long shadows across the room. It was a space meticulously designed, every detail an echo of Laura's touch. The marble countertops gleamed, the deep leather armchairs sat in perfect symmetry, and framed photographs adorned the walls, each one a snapshot of Joshua's life with Laura. Her smile, radiant and full of life, seemed to follow him wherever he went. Joshua stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city below churn in its endless rhythm. In his hand, he held the business card Maria had reluctantly taken the day before. He hadn't been able to shake the image of her, how her eyes had darted over him, guarded and sharp, while her children clung to her like fragile branches swaying in a storm. Mr. Grant, Cheryl, his assistant, interrupted gently, her voice pulling him back. "The investigator has arrived. He's waiting in the study." Joshua nodded, slipping the card into his pocket. "Send him in." Jack Harmon, a man of wiry build and unshakable confidence, entered with a folder tucked under his arm. "You've got an interesting one this time," Jack said, his voice low and steady. He placed the folder on the desk, tapping it lightly. Joshua hesitated. He'd been chasing ghosts since Laura's death, phantoms of the life they might have had. Was this another mirage? Taking a breath, he opened the folder. Inside were grainy photos of Maria and her children, notes scribbled in Jack's precise handwriting. "Maria Brown," Jack began. "No address, no stable employment. She's been in and out of shelters across the city for years. Lost her husband a while back. The kids, Alice and Juan, are twins about 4 years old. Other than that, nothing remarkable." Joshua's eyes lingered on a photograph of Maria, her face tired but resilient, her arm protectively around Alice. "And her past?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Jack shrugged. "No family on record. At least, not in the usual places. If there's more, it's buried deep." Joshua closed the folder and exhaled. "Keep digging," he said. "I want to know everything." The next morning, Joshua waited outside the same coffee shop where he'd first seen Maria. He leaned against his car, a sleek black sedan, trying to appear casual despite the tension coiling in his chest. People streamed past him, their faces blurring into anonymity. But his eyes scanned the crowd, searching for her. She arrived with the same cautious steps, the children clinging to her hands. Her coat was thin against the biting wind, and her hair fell limply around her face. When her eyes met Joshua's, her shoulders stiffened. "You again," she said, stopping a few feet away. Joshua straightened, his hands slipping into his coat pockets. "I meant what I said yesterday. Let me help you." Maria glanced at the children, who looked up at her expectantly. "We're fine," she said, but the edge in her voice had softened. Joshua gestured toward his car. "Just one meal, a warm place to sit for a while, no strings attached." Alice tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, please," she whispered, her wide eyes pleading. Maria sighed, her defenses cracking just enough. "Fine," she said, "but just for the kids." Joshua's penthouse was a world Maria had never imagined. The children's gasps of awe filled the room as they took in the high ceilings and the glittering skyline visible through the massive windows. Alice ran to the glass, pressing her tiny hands against it, while Juan trailed behind, his mouth slightly open. Maria stood near the entrance, her arms folded tightly. She watched Joshua move through the space, his ease a sharp contrast to her unease. "This isn't necessary," she said, her voice low. Joshua turned, his expression calm. "It's just dinner." The table was soon filled with warm bread, steaming bowls of soup, and platters of roasted vegetables. Alice and Juan ate with unabashed delight, their laughter breaking through the tension like sunlight through clouds. Maria, however, barely touched her plate. "Maria," Joshua said softly, "you don't have to be uncomfortable. I just want to help." Her eyes narrowed. "Why? Why go out of your way for someone you don't know?" Joshua hesitated, the question hanging heavy between them. "You remind me of someone," he admitted. "Someone I cared about." Before Maria could respond, Alice's voice piped up from across the room. "Mommy, look, she's pretty like you." The girl pointed to a framed photo on the wall. Laura, her face glowing with happiness. Maria's body stiffened as she stared at the photo, her breath catching. Slowly, she looked back at Joshua. "Who is she?" Joshua's throat tightened. "My wife," he said quietly. "Laura. She passed away 3 years ago." Maria's eyes darkened, her jaw tightening. "So that's it. That's why you're doing this." "It's not like that," Joshua began, but Maria cut him off. "You're trying to fix your grief through us," she said bitterly. "But we're not a replacement." Maria said nothing, her gaze lingering on the photo of Laura. Having an uncertainty cross her face, her words stung, and Joshua looked away, guilt pooling in his chest. "No," he said finally, his voice steady. "You're not. But that doesn't mean I can't help." Maria said nothing, her gaze lingering on the photo of Laura. The penthouse fell into a tense silence, broken only by the soft clinking of Juan's spoon against his bowl. Maria's gaze lingered on the photo of Laura, her face tightening with an emotion Joshua couldn't quite place. Finally, she tore her eyes away and looked down at her children. "Finish up," she said, her tone clipped. "We shouldn't stay long." Alice frowned, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the table. "But it's warm here, Mommy." Joshua, leaning against the edge of the kitchen counter, felt a pang in his chest. He saw the longing in the girl's wide eyes and the weariness in Maria's. They had nowhere else to go, but Maria's pride kept her walls firmly intact. "You don't have to rush," Joshua offered gently. "Stay as long as you need." Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. She hesitated, her shoulders stiff, before sitting back down. Her posture remained guarded, as though bracing for a fight that hadn't yet come. Joshua decided to break the silence. "If you don't mind me asking, where were you before?" He gestured vaguely, careful not to sound condescending. "Before all of this?" Maria's gaze flicked to him, wary. "Why does it matter?" "It doesn't," Joshua replied, his tone steady. "I just want to understand." She studied him for a long moment, her fingers tracing invisible lines on the table. Finally she sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I grew up in foster care," she began, her voice quieter now. "I don't remember much about the first few years, just being passed around a lot." Joshua nodded, letting her speak at her own pace. "I was born deaf," she continued, her fingers brushing against the edge of her hearing aid. "Most families didn't want to deal with that. Too much effort, I guess." She gave a bitter laugh, though her eyes didn't hold any humor. "By the time I turned 10, I stopped expecting to stay anywhere for long." Alice, oblivious to the heaviness in her mother's words, leaned against her arm. "But you stayed with Daddy," the little girl casually said. Maria's face softened, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "Yeah, I stayed with your daddy," she murmured. "He was the first person who made me feel like I belonged somewhere." Joshua watched the subtle shift in her expression, the way her guard momentarily dropped as she spoke about the man she had loved. "What happened to him?" he asked carefully. "He got sick," Maria said simply, her voice tightening. "And the bills?" She shook her head. "After he passed, everything fell apart. I tried to keep it together for the kids, but there's only so much you can do when the world keeps pushing you down." Joshua's fingers curled into his palm. He had seen desperation before, in business, in life. But there was something raw and unyielding in Maria's words. She wasn't asking for pity. She was simply stating the facts, as though she had long since accepted them. "You've been through a lot," he said softly. Maria shrugged, though her eyes flickered with something unspoken. "Everyone's been through something." Alice and Juan, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, had finished their meal and were now exploring the edge of the room. Alice pointed out the skyline, her small voice filled with awe. "Look, Mummy, we're so high up." Maria turned to watch them, her features softening. For a moment, the tension in her body seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet tenderness. "Don't touch the glass," she said gently, though her lips quirked into a faint smile. Joshua saw it then, the resilience she carried, the way she held herself together for her children, even when it was clear she was barely holding on. She wasn't just a reflection of Laura anymore. She had transformed into a completely different person. The sound of a phone vibrating on the counter broke the moment. Joshua glanced at the screen and saw Jack's name flashing. He hesitated before picking it up, stepping into the adjoining room. "What did you find?" Joshua asked, keeping his voice low. Jack's tone was careful. "It's complicated. There's more to her past than I expected." Joshua frowned. "Go on." "There's no record of her parents anywhere," Jack said, "but I found a mention of her in some old adoption files linked to a family named Riley. It could be a coincidence, but—" Joshua felt his breath catch. "Riley?" he repeated, his voice barely audible above a whisper. "Yeah," Jack confirmed. "It's not definitive yet. I'll keep digging." Joshua ended the call, his mind racing. Riley. The name clung to him like a shadow, a specter of the past he thought he'd buried. He glanced back toward the dining area where Maria was kneeling beside her children, helping Juan tie his shoes. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until he knew for sure. "Everything all right?" Maria's voice cut through his thoughts, her eyes narrowing as she noticed his expression. Joshua forced a smile. "Just work," he said, his voice steady. "Nothing to worry about." But as he watched her gather Alice and Juan's things, her wary gaze lingering on him, he knew the truth was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. Joshua sat alone in his office, the dim light of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the dark mahogany furniture. The folder Jack had previously given to him was now open, its contents dispersed before him like incompatible puzzle pieces. Maria's name was there, tied to adoption records from decades ago. But it wasn't just her name that caught his attention. It was the name Riley that had sent a cold rush through his veins. The Riley family, Laura's family. Joshua's hands tightened around the edge of the desk as his thoughts spiraled. How could they have kept this a secret? Laura had never mentioned a sister, let alone a twin. And now, Maria, abandoned, discarded like she was nothing, had unknowingly walked into his life. A soft knock at the door startled him. Cheryl's voice filtered through. "Mr. Grant, Jack's here again. He says it's urgent." "Send him in," Joshua said, his voice rough. Jack entered, his expression grim, and handed Joshua another folder. "This is everything I could find. Adoption records, correspondence from the Riley estate at the time. It's all there. Maria Riley was born minutes after Laura. Her deafness was noted in the medical records. 2 weeks later, she was given up for adoption. No further contact." Joshua's jaw tightened. "They erased her," he said, his voice low. Jack nodded. "It gets worse. Laura never knew. According to some old correspondence I dug up, Zachary Riley, Laura's father, made sure no one ever told her. Margaret Riley signed the papers, but from what I can tell, she didn't have much of a choice." Joshua leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the documents before him. The weight of the truth pressed down on him, heavy and unrelenting. At the shelter, Maria sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a small bag of clothes Alice had outgrown. The children played nearby, their laughter echoing faintly in the cramped space. She glanced at them, her lips curving into a faint smile despite the ache in her chest. Her thoughts drifted to Joshua. His kindness, while unexpected, had unsettled her. People like him didn't cross paths with people like her, not unless they wanted something. But what could he possibly want from her? A sharp knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Maria rose, cautiously pulling the door open, to find Joshua standing there, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice low so as not to alarm the children. "I need to talk to you," he said. She hesitated, but stepped aside, letting him in. Joshua entered the small room, his presence seeming to fill the space. He glanced at the children, who greeted him with bright smiles, before turning his attention to Maria. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. Maria frowned but nodded, leading him to a corner of the room. "What's this about?" Joshua took a deep breath. "I've been looking into your background," he began, his voice careful. Her expression darkened immediately. "You what?" "I wasn't trying to invade your privacy," he said quickly. I needed to understand." "Understand what?" she demanded, her tone rising. Joshua hesitated, searching for the right words. "Your name came up in some old records tied to the Riley family." Maria's brow furrowed. "The Riley family? I've never heard of them." Joshua's heart ached at the confusion in her eyes. "They're Laura's family," he said softly. "Your family." The words hovered in the air, akin to a blade ready to strike. Maria stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" "You're Laura's twin sister," Joshua said. "You were born minutes after her. But because you were deaf, they gave you up. Laura never knew you existed." For a moment, Maria said nothing, her face a mask of disbelief. Then the weight of his words sank in, and she staggered back, her hand gripping the edge of a table for support. "They gave me up," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because I was deaf." Joshua nodded, his throat tight. "I'm sorry, Maria. I can't imagine how this feels, but you deserve to know the truth." She turned away from him, her arms wrapping around herself as though to hold herself together. "So that's it," she said bitterly. "I wasn't good enough for them. They threw me away like I was nothing." Joshua took a step closer, his voice gentle. "You're not nothing, Maria. They made a terrible choice, but that doesn't define you." Maria's laugh was hollow, her shoulders trembling. "You don't get it. My whole life I've wondered why I wasn't wanted. And now I know. It was never about me. It was about them and their perfect little world." Joshua reached out, but she stepped away, her back to him. "I need time," she said, her voice tight. "Just go." "Maria, go," she repeated, her tone final. Joshua hesitated, but eventually nodded. "If you need anything, call me," he said quietly, before leaving the shelter. As the door closed behind him, Maria sank to the floor, her head in her hands. The laughter of her children filled the room, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. The truth Joshua had uncovered had torn her world apart, and she didn't know how to put the pieces back together. Maria sat by the window of her small shelter room, the glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the walls. The day's revelations churned in her mind like a relentless storm. The name Riley, her biological family, echoed in her thoughts, sharp and unforgiving. Her chest ached as questions piled on top of one another. Why had they hidden her existence? What kind of people could discard their child so easily? Alice and Juan were fast asleep on the makeshift bed, their soft breaths the only sound in the room. Maria's gaze shifted to them, and her shoulders sagged under the weight of her fears. She had managed to shield them from the chaos of the world so far, but for how much longer? Her phone buzzed against the table, breaking the stillness. Frowning, she picked it up. The message was from an unknown number. "You don't belong here. Leave before things get worse." Her stomach clenched as a wave of cold fear washed over her. It wasn't the first message she had received in the past week, but the timing felt cruelly precise, as though someone was watching her. Her fingers trembled as she locked the phone and set it back on the table, her heart pounding in her chest. The next morning, Joshua arrived at the shelter, his presence as steady as the autumn chill. Maria met him at the door, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes were guarded, her posture tense. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice clipped. Joshua's gaze softened. "To check on you, and to make sure you're okay after everything." Maria hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. She wanted to send him away, to keep the chaos of her life separate from his. But the memory of the threatening message lingered. Finally, she stepped aside and let him in. Joshua glanced around the modest room, his eyes lingering on the children who were playing quietly in the corner. Alice waved at him with a bright smile, while Juan shyly ducked behind his sister. "They seem to be adjusting well," he said, his tone gentle. Maria let out a hollow laugh. "Kids are resilient. I'm the one falling apart." Joshua's brow furrowed, concern flashing across his face. "What do you mean?" Maria hesitated, debating whether to share her fears. Finally, she exhaled sharply and sat down at the small table. "I've been getting these messages," she admitted, her voice low. "Threats from someone I don't know." Joshua's expression darkened. He pulled out the chair across from her and leaned forward, his tone firm. "What kind of threats?" "They're vague," Maria said, running a hand through her hair. "But it's clear they want me gone, and they're not afraid to scare me into leaving." "Have you told anyone else?" Joshua asked. She shook her head. "Who would I tell? And what difference would it make? People like me don't have anyone looking out for them." "Well, now you do," Joshua said, his voice steady. "I'm not going to overlook this, Maria. Whoever's behind this needs to be stopped. Maria's eyes met his, a flicker of uncertainty passing through them. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with suspicion. "You've already done more than enough." Joshua held her gaze. "Because I can help, and because no one deserves to feel unsafe, especially not you or your kids." Her defenses wavered for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a shake of her head. "I don't want to drag you into this." "You're not dragging me into anything," Joshua said firmly. "I'm already here." Later that day, Joshua called Jack into his office, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on him. As the investigator entered, Joshua wasted no time. "Maria's been receiving threats," Joshua said. "Find out who's behind them. And fast." Jack nodded, his expression grim. "Do you have anything to go on?" "She showed me one of the messages," Joshua said, his jaw tightening. "It came from an unlisted number. Start there." Jack nodded and left without another word, his efficiency reassuring Joshua. But as the hours ticked by, Joshua found himself growing more restless. He replayed Maria's guarded expression in his mind, the way she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. By the time Jack returned that evening, Joshua was pacing his office. The investigator's face was taut with urgency as he handed over a file. "I've traced the source of the messages," Jack said. "They're coming from someone tied to Wayne Ward." Joshua froze, the name hitting him like a blow. Wayne Ward was a ruthless businessman and one of Joshua's fiercest rivals. Their feud had spanned years, each man vying for dominance in the corporate world. But this was personal. "Ward," Joshua repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Why would he target Maria?" Jack shrugged. "Maybe he thinks she's a weakness, or maybe he's looking for leverage. Either way, it's him." Joshua's fists clenched at his sides as a surge of protectiveness swept through him. Wayne had crossed a line, and Joshua wasn't going to let it stand. "Keep digging," he said, his tone icy, "and make sure he knows I'm watching." As Jack left, Joshua sank into his chair, his mind racing. The stakes had just risen, and he was more determined than ever to protect Maria and her children from the shadows threatening to consume them. Maria stood in the corner of Joshua's penthouse, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The children played quietly on the plush carpet, their laughter muffled in the cavernous space. Maria's gaze, however, was fixed on the wall ahead, a gallery of photographs. Each frame held Laura's smiling face, her presence almost tangible in the room. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the edge of one frame. Laura, on her wedding day, her radiant smile captured forever. Laura, on a beach, her hair tossed by the wind. Laura, in Joshua's arms, the two of them frozen in a moment of unguarded joy. Maria's throat tightened. She could see her own features reflected in Laura's face, the same high cheekbones, the same green eyes. But the differences were undeniable. Laura was polished, poised, glowing with the kind of love and security Maria had never known. For a fleeting moment, a pang of jealousy struck her. Would Laura have welcomed her? If she had been alive, would she have reached out, pulled Maria into the fold of her perfect world, or would she have recoiled just as their parents had? The thought sent a wave of bitterness through Maria, but beneath it lay something softer, almost tender. This woman, her twin, her sister, had lived a life Maria could only dream of. Yet Laura's death had left a void so profound that even Joshua, powerful and unshakable, seemed lost in it. "Maria!" Joshua's voice startled her, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned quickly, her hand falling away from the photo. "Sorry," she said, her voice quieter now. "I was just looking." Joshua approached her, his gaze following hers to the photographs. "She was extraordinary," he said softly. "And she would have loved you." Maria swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Instead, she stepped back, creating a physical barrier between herself and the emotions threatening to spill over. "I doubt that," she said finally, her tone sharper than she intended. Joshua frowned, but didn't press further. "You're wrong," he said simply, before retreating to his desk, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts. Across the city, Wayne Ward's office buzzed with tension. The man himself sat behind a massive oak desk, his fingers steepled as he studied the photos and documents laid out before him. "Laura Grant," he murmured, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Or is it Maria now? You've hidden her well, Joshua, but not well enough." The idea had consumed him ever since he first saw Maria's photo. Her uncanny resemblance to Laura, Joshua's strange protectiveness, it all pointed to one conclusion. Joshua had faked Laura's death to shield her from something, and now Wayne had the means to destroy him. "Sir," a voice interrupted. One of Wayne's subordinates stood in the doorway, shifting nervously. "You wanted an update?" "Speak," Wayne barked, his eyes narrowing. "We've confirmed her location. She's staying at a temporary shelter downtown. And Joshua has been visiting regularly." Wayne's smile widened. "Of course he has," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The knight in shining armor, protecting his precious damsel. How predictable." The subordinate hesitated. "What's the next step, sir?" Wayne rose from his seat, his presence commanding and dangerous. "We're going to remind the world who Joshua Grant really is. A liar, a manipulator, and a fraud." He turned to the subordinate, his expression sharp. "Tinji, Ngai Beijio." The man nodded and left without another word, the air in the room heavy with anticipation. Wayne stared at the photos on his desk, his fingers drumming against the wood. "You've had your secrets long enough, Joshua," he muttered to himself. "Now it's my turn to control the narrative." Back in the penthouse, Maria stood by the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as the city's lights twinkled in the distance. Joshua had left her to think, retreating to his study. The weight of the day pressed heavily on her shoulders, the cracks in her armor threatening to split wide open. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Joshua stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I've asked Jack to stay on this," he said. "We'll find out who's behind the threats." Maria nodded, though her trust in Joshua was still tenuous. "And if you do, then what?" "Then we stop them," Joshua said simply, his voice firm. Maria studied him, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was a man who, for reasons she couldn't yet understand, had made her safety his priority. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice quiet. Joshua's jaw tightened. "Because I couldn't save Laura," he admitted. "But maybe I can make a difference this time." The honesty in his words struck her, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that he meant it. "All right," she said softly, "but I'm not your responsibility, Joshua. Don't make me your redemption." His gaze held hers, unwavering. "You're not. But that doesn't mean I'll walk away." Dear listeners, are you an only child, or do you have any siblings? If you are an only child, please comment Castella, and if you have siblings, please write Madeline. Thank you very much for this interaction. Across the city, Wayne's team worked through the night. The seeds of scandal were planted, ready to grow into a wildfire that would consume Joshua's carefully built empire. The whispers had begun, but the real storm was yet to come. And as Wayne leaned back in his chair, savoring the thought of Joshua's downfall, his smile was cold and triumphant. The tension builds as the shadow of Wayne's plans looms closer, setting the stage for a public unraveling. The following morning, the city woke to chaos. Headlines splashed across tabloids and screens. The secret life of Laura Grant. A scandal hidden in plain sight. Wayne Ward's plan had been executed with ruthless precision. The article suggested that Laura's death had been a fabrication orchestrated by Joshua Grant to protect a woman, a twin sister, hidden from the world. The article, brimming with unverified claims and speculative details, presented an unfavorable image. It accused Joshua of covering up Laura's return, implied shady dealings, and hinted at Maria's involvement. Though Maria's name wasn't directly mentioned, photos of her entering and leaving Joshua's penthouse were plastered across every outlet. The resemblance to Laura was impossible to miss. At the shelter, Maria stared at the screen of her phone, the article open in front of her. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the text, each word cutting deeper. "They're saying you're Laura, Mommy," Alice said quietly, clutching Juan's hand. Her wide, innocent eyes flicked up to her mother's. "No," Maria said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "They're wrong. Don't worry about it." But the children weren't the only ones who had noticed. Staff at the shelter whispered behind her back, their glances lingering longer than usual. When she walked to the common room, the television blared with coverage of the scandal. She quickly turned around and retreated to her small room, slamming the door behind her. Her phone buzzed on the table. Joshua. She let it ring twice before picking up. "What now?" she asked, her voice strained. "Have you seen it?" he asked, his tone heavy with guilt. "Seen it?" Maria laughed bitterly. "I can't escape it. Everywhere I go, it's there. Your life, your secrets, and now I'm part of the spectacle." Joshua's voice softened. "I didn't want this for you, Maria. You didn't think," she snapped. "You didn't think about how your problems would bleed into my life, into my children's lives." "I'm trying to fix this," Joshua said firmly. "I have my team working on a response." "Fix it?" Maria's voice cracked. "You think you can fix this with a press release? People are staring at me like I'm some kind of fraud. My kids are scared, and I can't even tell them it's going to be okay, because I don't know if it will be." "Maria," Joshua began, but she cut him off. She whispered, "I should never have trusted you. I should have remained in the shadows where no one could discover us." In his office, Joshua set the phone down, his chest heavy. The fallout was worse than he'd feared. The media frenzy had already begun to chip away at his carefully constructed reputation. But it wasn't his career he was most worried about. It was Maria. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. His assistant, Cheryl, stepped into the room, her expression tense. "Mr. Grant, the media requests are piling up. The phones won't stop." "Let them ring," Joshua said coldly. "I have bigger problems." Jack entered moments later, his face set in a grim mask. "Wayne's behind this," he said without preamble. "Every leak traces back to him or his people. He's not just coming for you, Joshua. He's coming for Maria." Joshua's jaw tightened. "Then we hit back, whatever it takes." Jack hesitated. "That won't be easy. The situation is rapidly becoming unmanageable. The public loves a scandal, and Wayne knew exactly how to frame this." Joshua stood, his fists clenched at his sides. "I don't care how hard it is. Maria doesn't deserve this. Her kids don't deserve this. Wayne wants a fight. Fine. He'll get one." Across town, Wayne Ward sat in his office, watching the news coverage with a satisfied smirk. His subordinates hovered nearby, awaiting instructions. "Look at them scramble," Wayne said, gesturing at the screen. "Joshua Grant, the untouchable, brought to his knees. And it's only just begun." One of the men shifted uncomfortably. "What if this backfires, sir? What if he finds a way to turn it around?" Wayne shot him a cold glance. "Then we double down. Keep the pressure on. The public loves a good scandal, and we've given them a feast. Joshua can't talk his way out of this one." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with malice. "We're going to burn his empire to the ground. And Maria? She'll be collateral damage." Meanwhile, at the Riley estate, Margaret Riley sat in her study, the morning paper spread before her. Her tea sat untouched, her hands trembling as she read the headline. The photo of Maria caught her attention first, the face that looked so much like Laura's, yet held a different kind of pain. Her chest tightened as memories she'd long buried surfaced. The tiny bundle she'd held for mere moments before Zachary had taken her away. The guilt that had eaten at her for decades, knowing she'd abandoned her daughter to an unknown fate. "Maria," she whispered, her voice breaking. For years, she had convinced herself it was for the best, that Zachary had been right. But now, staring at the woman her daughter had become, she felt the weight of her mistakes more acutely than ever. Margaret rose from her chair, determination hardening her features. It was time to confront the reality, and time to find her daughter. Margaret's resolve to reach out sets the stage for a confrontation that will change everything for Maria. Meanwhile, Joshua prepares for a confrontation with Wayne as the scandal continues to escalate. The knock at the door startled Maria from her restless thoughts. She had spent most of the day pacing the small room in Joshua's penthouse, consumed by frustration and exhaustion. The scandal swirling around her was suffocating, and each headline felt like another weight pressing down on her chest. "Mummy, someone's here," Alice said softly, peeking out from behind the couch where she and Juan were playing. Maria moved toward the door, her guard immediately rising. She anticipated Joshua or another member of his staff, but as she opened the door, the sight of an older woman chilled her. The woman's face was lined with age and worry, her grey eyes piercingly familiar. "Maria," the woman said, her voice trembling, "my name is Margaret Riley. I'm your mother." Joshua entered the room moments later, his expression darkening as he saw Margaret. "Mrs. Riley," he said, his tone firm but cautious, "this is unexpected." Margaret glanced at him, her hands gripping her purse tightly. "I had to come," she said. "I read the article, I saw her photo, and I knew." Her voice broke, and she turned back to Maria. "I've been waiting for this moment my entire life." Maria stepped back, her body rigid. "You're my mother?" she asked, her voice thick with disbelief. "You expect me to believe that?" Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening. "It's true, I gave birth to you and Laura. But she faltered, struggling for words. "I made a terrible mistake. I let your father convince me it was the right thing to do. He said you wouldn't have a good life with us, that we couldn't handle it because you were different." Maria's jaw clenched, her voice sharp. "Because I was deaf." Margaret flinched, but didn't deny it. "It was wrong. I see that now. I should have fought for you, but I was weak, Maria. I was weak, and I let him take you away." The room fell silent. Maria's mind raced as she tried to process the words. This woman, this stranger, claimed to be her mother, the mother who had abandoned her without a second thought. "Why now?" Maria asked, her voice cold. "Why not years ago? Why not when I was a kid, being shuffled between foster homes, or when I was struggling to survive on my own? Why come here, now, when it's too late?" Margaret's tears spilled over, her voice cracking. "Because I was a coward," she admitted. "I was too ashamed to face what I'd done. But when I saw you in that article, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to find you. I had to be honest with you." Maria crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "And what do you expect me to do with that truth? Forgive you? Pretend it never happened?" "No," Margaret said quickly. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm here now. And I'm so sorry." Joshua watched the exchange silently, his heart heavy. He could see the turmoil in Maria's eyes, the anger and hurt warring with the faintest glimmer of something else. Hope, perhaps. He stepped forward, his voice calm. "Maria, maybe you should hear her out," he said gently. "At least give her a chance to explain." Maria turned on him, her anger flaring. "You don't get to tell me what to do, Joshua. You don't know what it's like to be thrown away like garbage, to spend your whole life wondering why you weren't enough." Joshua held her gaze, his expression steady. "No, I don't. But I know what it's like to lose someone you care about and never get the chance to say what you need to say. Don't let that happen here." Maria's shoulders sagged, her anger giving way to exhaustion. She looked back at Margaret, who stood trembling in the doorway, her eyes pleading. "I don't know if I can do this," Maria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Margaret stepped forward cautiously. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, "but I'll do whatever it takes to make it up to you. Just let me be part of your life, even if it's only a small part." Alice and Juan, who had been quietly observing, stepped closer. "Mommy," Alice said softly, tugging at Maria's sleeve. She looked sad, like she really wants to say sorry. Maria knelt down, pulling her children close. Their innocence reminded her of what she had fought so hard to protect, a life where they didn't have to feel the pain she had endured. She looked up at Margaret, her heart heavy, but her resolve softening. "I'll think about it," Maria said finally, "but don't expect miracles." Margaret nodded, her tears flowing freely. "That's all I ask," she said. Later, after Margaret had left, Maria sat by the window, her thoughts a tangled mess. Joshua approached her, sitting down quietly beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked. Maria let out a shaky breath. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's like everything I thought I knew about myself is crumbling, and I don't know how to put it back together." Joshua placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "Not anymore." Maria agrees to reconnect with Margaret, but her wounds are far from healed. The door to her past has been opened, and what lies beyond it threatens to reshape her future. Maria's resolve had hardened overnight. Sitting at Joshua's dining table, surrounded by stacks of newspaper clippings and legal briefs, she began to realize that this scandal wasn't just an attack on her, it was an attack on everything she had fought to protect. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. "Are you sure about this?" Joshua asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Maria looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. "Yes," she said. "If I don't speak for myself, no one else will." Joshua nodded, his admiration for her growing. Over the past few days, he had seen her transform from someone burdened by fear and doubt into a woman ready to control her narrative. He reached across the table and handed her a folder. "This is everything we have on Wayne's connections to the press. It's solid evidence of his involvement in spreading false information." Maria opened the folder, her jaw tightening as she skimmed through the documents. "He's not going to stop unless we make him." The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the gallery, their cameras clicking incessantly as Joshua and Maria entered together. Beside them was Margaret, her presence quiet but resolute. She had insisted on being there, determined to support Maria in any way she could. The prosecution laid out the case against Wayne Ward with meticulous precision. Emails linking him to tabloid reporters, payments made to anonymous sources, and even recordings of conversations in which he orchestrated the release of defamatory articles. Gradually, the story Wayne had crafted started to disintegrate. However, Maria's decision to take a stand marked a pivotal moment. She adjusted the microphone nervously, her hands trembling slightly as she glanced at the sea of faces staring back at her. Joshua gave her an encouraging nod from his seat, and Margaret's reassuring smile steadied her nerves. "My name is Maria," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "And for most of my life, I didn't know who I was. I grew up in foster care, never understanding why I was abandoned. When I found out the truth about my family, it was overwhelming. But that truth doesn't give anyone the right to twist my story for their own gain." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "The articles you've all read aren't just lies about me. They're an attack on my children, my late sister, and the man who has done everything to protect us. Wayne Ward doesn't care about the truth. He cares about power and destruction." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment the room was silent. Then, from the back of the gallery, came the faint sound of applause. It grew louder, rippling through the crowd until even the journalists were clapping. Maria blinked, her composure faltering as emotion threatened to overwhelm her. Outside the courthouse, a press conference was held. Joshua stepped to the podium first, his voice commanding as he addressed the crowd. "This has never been about me," he said. "This is about a woman and her children who were thrust into a spotlight they didn't ask for. It's about the lies that were spread to tear them down. And it's about standing up to people like Wayne Ward, who believe they can act without consequence." He stepped back, gesturing for Maria to take the podium. She hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, her hands gripping the sides tightly. "I've spent my life hiding," she said, "hiding from the pain of my past, from the fear of being judged. But I'm done hiding. This is my story, and I won't let anyone else tell it for me." The crowd erupted into cheers, and for the first time in a long time, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. The verdict came 2 days later. Wayne Ward was convicted on multiple counts, including harassment, defamation, and fraud. His empire began to crumble as clients distanced themselves and lawsuits piled up. The public, once enamored by the scandal, now turned their ire on him. For Maria, the victory was bittersweet. She had reclaimed her voice, but the wounds of the past still lingered. Margaret stayed close, quietly offering support as Maria began the slow process of healing. In the days that followed, public sentiment shifted dramatically. Articles appeared praising Maria's bravery and highlighting her story as one of resilience and strength. The once vicious headlines gave way to messages of support and admiration. Joshua sat with Maria one evening, a rare moment of quiet in the whirlwind of their lives. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. Maria shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." Joshua's gaze softened. "I think you would have found a way. You're stronger than you know." As Maria begins to rebuild her life, Margaret approaches her with a box of old letters and photographs, a glimpse into the family she never knew. Maria, hesitant but curious, agrees to open it, setting the stage for the next chapter of her journey. The Laura Grant Foundation's inaugural gala was held on a crisp autumn evening, the air filled with the buzz of hope and renewal. The grand hall was adorned with subtle elegance. Soft golden lights illuminated the room, and displays showcasing the Foundation's mission were placed along the walls. Photos of Laura, vibrant and full of life, were interspersed with images of single mothers, children, and individuals whose lives the Foundation aimed to touch. Joshua stood near the entrance, greeting guests with practiced charm. His eyes, however, constantly searched the room until they landed on Maria. She was standing by one of the displays, speaking with a small group of women. Her confidence was quiet, but evident, her smile genuine as she shared her own story. "You look proud," Margaret said softly, stepping beside him. She had remained a steady presence since her reconciliation with Maria, her guilt transforming into an unwavering dedication to supporting her daughter. "I am," Joshua replied, his voice filled with warmth. "She's found her place." Maria adjusted the microphone at the podium, her hands steady despite the sea of faces before her. This was no courtroom. This was her moment to speak freely, not in defense, but in celebration. "Good evening," she began, her voice resonant and calm. "When Joshua approached me about this foundation, I wasn't sure if I was ready to be part of something so big. For most of my life, I've been focused on survival. I didn't think I had anything to offer beyond that." She paused, her eyes scanning the audience. "But over the past few months, I've learned something important. Survival is a strength. And when we share our strength with others, we create something extraordinary." The Laura Grant Foundation is about more than providing resources. It's about restoring dignity, hope, and the belief that no one has to face their struggles alone. The applause was immediate and heartfelt. Maria stepped back from the podium, her heart swelling as she caught sight of Alice and Juan clapping enthusiastically from their seats. Margaret and Joshua exchanged proud smiles as they joined in the applause. The foundation quickly became a beacon for change. Under Maria's leadership, programs were launched to provide housing, education, and job training for single mothers. Homeless shelters received funding and resources, transforming them into places of transition rather than despair. Alice and Juan thrived in their new environment. They attended a nearby school, their laughter filling the halls of the penthouse that had become their home. Maria marveled at how quickly they adapted, their resilience reminding her why she had fought so hard. Margaret visited frequently, her relationship with Maria growing stronger with each passing day. She often brought small tokens of the past, photos, trinkets, and stories that helped bridge the gap between the life Maria had lost and the one she was building. One evening, Margaret arrived with a weathered wooden box, its edges smoothed by time. She placed it gently on the table in front of Maria. "These belonged to Laura," Margaret said, her voice tinged with emotion. "She wrote them over the years. I found them after she passed." Maria hesitated, her hand hovering over the box. "What's in them?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Letters, journals. They must be remnants of her heart, I presume." With trembling hands, Maria opened the box. Inside were neatly folded letters, their edges worn from years of handling. She picked one at random, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Maria began to read. "Dear future me, I don't know if I'll ever send this, or if you'll even see it, but writing helps me think. Lately I've been feeling like something's missing. It's hard to explain. It's like a shadow, always there but just out of reach. I keep having these dreams about a girl. She looks like me, but she isn't me. And when I wake up, I feel this ache in my chest, like I've lost something I didn't even know I had." Maria's breath hitched as she continued. "I wonder if there's a part of my life I don't know about, a secret waiting to be uncovered. If that's true, I hope she's out there somewhere, and I hope she knows she's loved, even if I never get the chance." to tell her. Tears blurred her vision as she folded the letter and placed it back in the box. She looked up at Margaret, her voice breaking. She felt it, didn't she? She knew. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. She always had this sense that something was missing. I never understood it until now. Later that evening, Maria sat by the window, the box of letters beside her. The city lights glittered below, a reflection of the possibilities ahead. Joshua joined her, a mug of tea in his hand. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle. Maria smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the edges of the box. "I'm okay," she said. "For the first time, I feel like I really belong somewhere." Joshua nodded, his gaze soft. "You've always belonged, Maria. It just took a while to find the right place." She looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Joshua, for everything." Maria finds another letter, addressed specifically to her, with Laura's final words of love and acceptance. The discovery sets the stage for Maria's ultimate journey of healing and self-acceptance. The Riley estate shimmered under the glow of string lights, the vast gardens transformed into a welcoming venue for the Laura Grant Foundation's official launch gala. Guests arrived dressed in their finest, mingling beneath the sprawling canopy of oak trees. The air was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and a sense of anticipation. Maria stood at the edge of the crowd, her children tugging at her gown with excitement. Alice pointed toward the main stage, where musicians were preparing to perform, while Juan clung to her arm, his curiosity evident in his wide eyes. "You look incredible," Joshua said as he approached, his voice warm. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, his tie matching the deep blue of the evening sky. Maria glanced down at her elegant, yet simple dress, one that Margaret had insisted she wear. "I feel out of place," she admitted, smoothing the fabric nervously. Joshua smiled. "You're exactly where you're meant to be." The evening progressed smoothly, with presentations highlighting the Foundation's goals and achievements. Videos played on large screens, showcasing the lives that had already been transformed. Maria watched with a mixture of pride and humility, her heart swelling as she realized the impact their work was having. As the MC announced her name, the crowd erupted into applause. Maria took a deep breath and walked to the podium, her steps steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying over the hushed audience. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating a foundation. It's about celebrating resilience, family, and second chances." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "For a long time, I didn't believe in second chances. My life was defined by what I'd lost, by the pain of abandonment and the struggle to survive. But then, people like Joshua and Margaret came into my life. They reminded me that hope isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you create." Maria's voice softened as she continued. "This foundation isn't just a tribute to Laura. It's a promise to everyone who feels unseen, unheard, or unloved. It's a promise that they matter, that their stories matter, and that there's always a way forward." The applause was deafening as she stepped back, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She caught sight of Margaret wiping her eyes, a mixture of pride and regret etched into her features. Joshua gave her a reassuring nod, his own expression one of quiet admiration. Later in the evening, Margaret took the stage. The audience fell silent as she began to speak, her voice trembling but steady. "My name is Margaret Riley," she said, her hands gripping the podium tightly. "And I am here tonight, not just as a supporter of this foundation, but as a mother seeking redemption." She took a deep breath, her gaze finding Maria in the crowd. Many years ago, I made a choice. A terrible choice that robbed my daughter of the life she deserved. I let fear dictate my actions, and I abandoned her when she needed me most. Margaret's voice cracked, but she pressed on. Tonight, I want to say publicly what I've been saying privately for weeks. Maria, I am sorry. I sincerely apologize, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. The room was silent, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. Maria stood slowly, her children watching her with wide eyes. She walked to the stage, the crowd parting to let her through. When she reached Margaret, she hesitated for a moment before pulling her into a tight embrace. I forgive you, Maria whispered, her voice breaking. But we're not going to live in the past anymore. We're going to move forward, together. The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears as they watched the emotional reunion. The evening ended with laughter and dancing, the tension of the past weeks finally giving way to joy. Alice and Juan twirled on the dance floor, their giggles echoing through the night. Maria and Joshua stood to the side, watching the children with content smiles. You've given them a good life, Joshua said quietly. Maria turned to him, her expression thoughtful. We've given them a good life, she corrected, and it's only the beginning. A few days later, Joshua visited the Riley estate, a small bouquet of flowers in hand. He found Maria and the children in the garden, their laughter carrying through the crisp morning air. Alice ran to him, her face alight with excitement. Mr. Joshua, look, we're planting flowers, she exclaimed, holding up a trowel. Joshua chuckled, crouching to inspect her handiwork. You're doing a great job. Maria approached, her hands smudged with dirt, but her smile radiant. You didn't have to come, she teased. I wanted to, he replied simply. As they stood together, watching the children play, a sense of peace settled over them. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it had been replaced by something stronger, hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.